a rock legend living amidst lights and cheers, with an estimated fortune of over $500 million, seemingly destined to leave behind an empire for his 8 children. But recently, Mick Jagger, the soul of the Rolling Stones, stunned the world by declaring that he is considering donating his entire massive music catalog to charity instead of leaving it to his children. What lies behind that decision? A noble humanitarian act, or a powerful message about the value of effort and independence? When legacy becomes a lesson, not only the family, but the whole world must reflect. What do you think about this decision? Comment number 1 if you agree, or number 0 if you disagree with Mick Jagger. Enjoy the video, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to support us. And now let's uncover the real story behind these tears. A voice forged from thunder echoing where silence once reigned. From a boy imprisoned by order and quiet in post-war England to the man who built a fortune of over $540 million. He didn't just run from time, he defied it. He took the fine lines of discipline and tore them into rhythm, turning exile into empire, pain into harmony, and death itself into legend. No one in music has endured like he has. The artist who turned chaos into a hymn, the one who showed the world that survival can roar louder than youth. He gave us satisfaction, and the world discovered its own thirst. He gave us the beginning, and half a century later, the world is still in motion. His fortune is truly astonishing. Over 100 albums, more than 2,000 performances, tours, grossing billions of dollars, and a brand that has become the golden emblem of rock's global throne. His retreats span across continents. An elegant riverside mansion in Florida, where recovery meets rebirth. A centuries-old chateau in France, still echoing with the ghosts of creation. A townhouse in London plated in platinum, a testament to endurance. And a Caribbean retreat where even the sea seems to bow before his legend. His art collection gleams through sunlit halls. His car's classic British machines rest in polished reverence. Every estate, every artifact whispers the same truth the boy once mocked for dreaming too big, built a kingdom from the very sound of defiance. Brian Jones, Ian Stewart, Charlie Watts, the names that still haunt him like unresolved strings. Every spotlight once burned through painkillers and trembling knees. Every encore concealed the ragged breaths of a heart stitched together by surgeons fighting to keep the rhythm alive. Behind the thunderous roar of the crowd were nights when the whole world slept, but he could not. Staring at the hotel ceiling, counting the ghosts of those who never made it this far. The applause built the empire, yes, but it also devoured the man standing at its center. Some stories don't begin in chaos. They begin in quiet rooms where even the air seems to listen. It was there on July 26, 1943, that a boy named Michael Philip Jagger was born. He was the first son of Basil and Eva Jagger, a teacher and a hairdresser who valued discipline over comfort. Dinner table conversations were brief. The clinking of cutlery often rang louder than their voices. His father, a former Royal Air Force coach, spoke in a commanding tone rather than a gentle one. His mother smiled, tender but distant, never asking him what he dreamed of. Love existed there, yes, but it was a quiet kind of love. The kind of love that makes a child wonder if it's real at all. Many years later, Mick recounted that my father wanted me to become a respectable person, but I never was. At Wentworth Elementary School, he was the boy tapping rhythms on the desk while the whole class was silent. A quiet rebellion that no one noticed. His younger brother Chris followed the rules with ease, but Mick was restless, torn between duty and desire. When he talked about Muddy Waters or Chuck Berry, his classmates would burst out laughing. "That's not music," they told him, and even his father, kind but blind, would sigh, "You're too smart to waste your life on noise." So he waited until the lights were completely out, then hid under the covers. His hands trembled as he held the flashlight, the record spinning softly beside him. Each note was a heartbeat of forbidden freedom. The winter air seeped through the thin walls. He sang into his pillow to keep warm. In the secret world of rhythm and sound, he found what his family could not give him, the feeling of belonging to something alive. "I couldn't tell them," he would later confess. "They wouldn't understand." By the age of 14, the pain had become unbearable. One night, he slipped out the back door, his breath turning to mist in the cold air. He found refuge in the railway pub, a rundown tavern where the guitar howled against cracked walls and the floor shook with every beat. He borrowed a battered microphone and sang until his voice broke. In just one song, he was seen. Then the lights went out, and the darkness reminded him that home was still waiting, silent as judgment. He walked through the fog and streetlights, humming softly, afraid that even the night could hear his secret. That fleeting moment of freedom carried both exhilaration and guilt, the thrill of being noticed, the fear of being discovered. It was the first time he tasted a thirst that would never leave him, to turn silence into sound and sound into eternity. When the world demanded that he grow up, he tried. He enrolled at the London School of Economics, studying finance, to please his parents, learning to measure value in numbers while secretly pursuing immeasurable worth. And then fate arrived almost by accident. On a gray morning at Dartford Station, he saw Keith Richards holding a Chuck Berry record. It was the same sound that had once kept him alive beneath his shell of fear. That brief encounter ignited a fire that would change music forever. Mick Jagger's childhood was not defined by hunger or cruelty, but by something far sharper, the slow-burning hunger of a soul forced into silence. He learned that comfort could be the harshest prison, and freedom was not something given. It was taken. One song at a time, one scream at a time, one heartbeat at a time. It was 1961. London reeked of soot and rain. A city trapped between ruin and rebirth, where the fog curled around the lights like ghosts unwilling to leave. At 18, Mick Jagger stood between two worlds, the safe, solemn classrooms of the London School of Economics and the chaotic, smoky streets of Soho, where music throbbed like a pulse beneath the city's gray skin. By day, he studied balance sheets. By night, he pursued something no textbook could define. He sang in bars where beer soaked the floors, where shattered neon lights rang out like dying stars. The pay barely bought bread. Later, he would recall, "We had no money. We just played because we had to play." Those early years were a jumble of hunger and hope. He slept on friends' sofas, wore other people's clothes, and walked home through the icy fog because the bus was a luxury. The soles of his shoes cracked with every step, and the London wind cut through his coat like a knife. Some nights he pressed his numb hands against the heater in a borrowed flat just to feel alive again. The city's noise was his lullaby, its indifference his test. Bands came and went, names forgotten, strings snapped, promises broken, but the fire within him refused to die. Then that night changed everything. A failed gig, an indifferent crowd. He stood alone by the Thames pockets, empty, watching the fog roll over the water like smoke from a dying fire. The city glittered in the distance, indifferent, unreachable. "If no one listens," he whispered in the dark, "I will sing louder." It was not a prayer. It was a vow. The answer came a few weeks later on October 17, 1961, at Platform 2 of Dartford Station. A boy record of Chuck Berry tucked under his arm looked up and smiled. Keith Richards. 2 kids, 1 dream, both hungry. That meeting was not a random coincidence. It was the spark. In just a few weeks, they were writing music in damp rooms, wallpaper peeling like old skin, laughing tiredly, their breath fogging the windows, as if the music itself were alive. They had nothing but rhythm faith and borrowed guitars, but that was enough. In that cramped apartment where the clatter of horns sounded like drums and the rain pattered on the glass, the Rolling Stones began to breathe. By 1962, Mick had made his choice. He turned his back on safety and stepped into uncertainty. The early Stones had no money, no fame, no plan, only challenge. They practiced in a cold basement until mold crept across the amps. They played music not for glory, but for warmth. Their fingers bled on the rusted strings. Their breath turned into mist. They drank lukewarm tea together, bread stale and cracked like glass. Laughter sometimes sounded like surrender. Promoters mocked them. Critics called them trash. Once, after being pelted with a bottle, Mick wiped the blood from his lip and smiled. At least they listened. Behind that smile was a broken heart, but one that was not shattered. Then came 1963. The Beatles reached out to them, "I want to be your man." And for the first time, the world's noise turned toward them. But fame did not save them. It tested them. Headlines mocked them. "Would you let your daughter marry a rock guy?" Police tailed their car. Landlords refused to rent them rooms. The very city that once ignored them now tried to cage them. But Mick kept walking. He said, "You have to keep walking. To stop is to drown." He had known hunger, cold, ridicule, but from the freezing nights and jeering crowds, he built rhythm, faith, and fire. Every locked door became a drum. Every insult, every lyric, every wound, every chord. When the whole world finally listened, that noise was deafening. Fame could not elevate Mick Jagger. It was what had crushed him before. By 1964, at just 21, he had gone from sleeping on borrowed sofas to standing under stadium lights blazing like fire. "We wanted to be famous," he said later, "but no one tells you the price you have to pay." The Rolling Stones were no longer just a band. They were a rebellion in sound, a rebellion in leather, a cultural earthquake that split the polite world in two. Every anthem, Satisfaction, Sympathy for the Devil, was not written by him. It was ripped from the rib of an anxious generation. But with every resounding clap, the air around him grew thinner. The boy who once sang to survive poverty was now singing to survive himself. By 1967, the crown had thorns. The very press that once called him the golden child of rock now spat his name like poison. The rebellion had become too dangerous. They were no longer just a band. They were a revolution dressed in velvet and silk. The powers that be decided it was time to extinguish the fire. The trap had been set. That February, at Keith Richards's countryside estate in Redlands, a quiet night of rest was shattered. A paid driver had been paid to spy. The news of the world had been tipped off. Doors were flung open, shoes stomped the floor, flashlights cut through the haze. The police did not come to question. They came to make an example. They found Marianne Faithfull, Mick's girlfriend, covered by a fur rug, a detail that instantly became a symbol of sin for a hungry press. In Mick's pocket, they found 4 amphetamine tablets. In many countries, they were legal, but in England, they were enough to brand him a criminal. Music had become evidence. The legend of freedom collapsed under the weight of authority. It was not just an arrest, it was a war. Mick, Keith, and art dealer Robert Fraser were taken into custody. The charges were minor, but the penalties were severe. Tabloids screamed about drugs and depravity. Politicians demanded blood. Suddenly, the Rolling Stones became enemies of propriety. Marianne, just 20, stood outside the courtroom, ready to take the blame to save him. "Those pills are mine," she whispered. But Mick wouldn't let her fall. He stepped forward unflinching and took responsibility. It was loyalty disguised as rebellion. The sentence came swiftly and mercilessly. Mick was sentenced to 3 months in prison. Keith received a 1-year term. Just when it seemed everything was settled, the unimaginable happened. The Times of London, the voice of the British elite, turned against itself. Editor William Rees-Mogg published an editorial that changed everything. Who breaks a butterfly on a wheel? His words cut through the frenzy. Was it right, he asked, to ruin a man's life over a handful of pills? With a single headline, the tide had turned. Within weeks, the sentence was overturned on appeal. Technically, they were free, but freedom came at a cost. Inside Mick, something had cracked. Fame was no shield, it was a target. He began to understand the machinery of power. That experience taught him the first rule of survival: control everything you can before the world controls you. From that night on, he became a strategist. But the attacks continued. In 1970, their manager Alan Klein claimed ownership of their early songs. Satisfaction. The anthem that had changed the world would now bring a fortune to someone else. "Never sign anything you haven't read twice," Mick said bitterly. The shocks kept coming. By 1971, Britain's 93% top income tax had left them drained. Just as the applause faded, the ground beneath them shook. They packed up the few things they could not leave behind: guitars, tapes, ghosts, and pride. They were not fleeing justice. They were fleeing suffocation. London receded behind them. France awaited not as paradise, but as purgatory. Their rented refuge, Villa Nelcote, loomed like a forgotten kingdom. Cracked marble floors, walls exhaling damp air. "We were exiled ghosts," Mick would later recall, but ghosts could still make noise. In that basement, half studio, half tomb, they etched their exile. The sound was sweat rust salvation. Power failures corroded instruments. Keith vanished for days. Amps broke mid-session. Yet somehow, from that chaos, something eternal emerged. Exile on Main Saint did not chase perfection. It was the embodiment of survival. The album was forged from sweat whiskey and exile, destined one day to be hailed as the greatest album ever made. And amid all that ruin, love blossomed. In May 1971, in Saint-Tropez, Mick, dressed in a white linen suit, held Bianca Perez Mora Macias's hand before a sea of cameras. The world saw glamour. Those closest saw a man smiling as if trying to remember. "This place is beautiful," he said, "but it doesn't feel like home." It was the first time he realized freedom and loneliness could feel exactly the same. The 1970s blurred into a fever, glory intertwined with collapse, 60,000-seat stadiums, endless tours. On stage, Jagger was a wildfire. Off stage, the cost etched itself into his flesh. He slept fitfully, his voice hoarse, knees bruised. Once during a 1976 show in Paris, he collapsed backstage, heart racing. The doctor begged him to stop, but he didn't. He stood smiling through the pain and finished the encore. "Never show weakness," he said, "when they've paid to see you burn." But the first crack in Mick Jagger's world did not come from exhaustion. It came with a silence so heavy it made the walls hum. The summer of 1969 should have been radiant. Instead, it carved a scar that would never heal. It was the year Brian Jones, not just a bandmate but a co-architect of the Rolling Stones, was gone. Behind Brian's flashes of genius, darkness was slowly closing in. Addiction tightened its grip, legal troubles piled up. Mick watched it all powerless. Brian's laughter grew hoarse, his eyes vacant. At 25, Mick was too young to be anyone's savior, yet leadership demanded cruelty, cloaked in mercy. The night before the confrontation, he couldn't sleep, muttering, "If I don't act, he'll collapse. If I do, he'll hate me." By dawn, the decision had been made. He had to look his friend in the eye and ask him to leave, not out of anger, but out of sorrow. "I thought it would help him," Mick whispered years later. "I thought he just needed time." But time fell silent. And then the world seemed to stop. July 3rd, 1969. Brian was found dead in the still waters of his own swimming pool. The press called it an accident. Whispers suggested something darker. The truth, like Brian himself, sank beneath the surface and never resurfaced. When the news reached Mick, he lay still for hours. He didn't cry. His chest ached. You think you're ready for loss until it stands right in front of you. That night, innocence drowned with Brian, and something colder rose in its place. That image haunted him for decades, scorching dreams and echoing through quiet hotel rooms. Fame had promised immortality, but the truth was ruthless. 2 days later, the Hyde Park concert. What should have been a joyous rebirth became a public spectacle. Thousands stood in silence. Mick stepped onto the stage dressed in white, his face pale. The whole world expected him to collapse. Instead, his voice trembled through Shelley's poem Adonis. The pages in his hands fluttered. Then, as the final words faded, hundreds of white butterflies rose into the sky like liberated fragments of a soul. That day, the Rolling Stones did not play music for fame. They played to transcend grief. The crowd witnessed a tribute. Mick felt a funeral. "You should have been there," he murmured years later. From that summer on, Mick's body carried the weight of memories. The doctors called it exhaustion. Mick called it the aftermath. He buried the pain in control contracts and constant motion. "If I stop," he said, "I'll disappear." And that was the lesson Brian left behind. Music can save others, but only discipline can save you. This was one of the most difficult decisions of his life, a ruthless but necessary business decision or a betrayal of friendship. Do you think Mick did the right thing in firing Brian Jones to save the band comment 1 for right and 0 for wrong? But the tragedy wasn't over. Altamont. Even now that name still shudders in Mick Jagger's memory. It was meant to be a gift, a free concert to close out 1969 with hope, peace, love, and music. That was the dream. But on that cold December day, the heartbeat of the decade stopped. More than 300,000 people gathered. As the Stones finally took the stage at Twilight, the air changed. Scuffles broke out, bottles flew, fear rippled through the crowd. And then, just steps away from Mick, the unthinkable happened. Meredith Hunter, 18 years old, was caught in a violent clash and was murdered. One heartbeat, he was dancing. The next, the music was dead. The sirens wailed. Mick froze, microphone in hand, his breath catching. Years later, he would whisper, "It felt like the air just left the world. One moment we were playing, the next we were staring at death." For the first time in his life, Mick Jagger had nothing to say. That night didn't just end a concert. It closed an entire era. The fragile dream that sound could heal the world had shattered. For Mick, it became a wound that never closed. "Altamont took something from me," he said. "Something I never got back." He meant faith. Faith in the innocence of music. For years, he woke up in cold sweats, haunted. Every performance after that carried a shadow of fear. The stage was both a sanctuary and a battlefield. Years later, FBI files revealed that members of the motorcycle club hired for security had allegedly plotted revenge. They believed Mick had abandoned them. A plan was hatched to reach his seaside home by boat, but a sudden storm swamped the attempt. What sounded like rumor hardened into fact. For Mick, reality had shifted. He began to instinctively memorize exits like lyrics. "Just keep moving because standing still is when the fear catches up." The fear lived not just in his mind but in his body. His heart hammered erratically. Doctors called it anxiety. Mick called it a living memory. Altamont had killed the illusion that music could protect anyone. From that wound, the armor was forged. Mick channeled the pain into precision, into mastering contracts, into a determination that chaos would never steal his stage again. After Altamont, one band member recounted, "Mick became the general because someone had to keep us alive." By the mid-1980s, the Rolling Stones had conquered everything except peace. The world still screamed their names, but backstage, the air was heavy with fatigue and resentment. They weren't hungry kids anymore. They were moving empires. And for Mick, the stage that once liberated him now felt like a golden cage. It happened in Amsterdam. Just another hotel, another sleepless night, a hallway, a telephone, 4 careless words. "Where is my drummer?" He said it lightly. But Charlie Watts, the quiet rhythm that had anchored Mick through 20 years of chaos, heard something deeper. Possession where there should have been brotherhood. Just minutes later, the soft-spoken man in the gray suit knocked on Mick's door. No stage lights, no crowd. Charlie adjusted his cufflinks, looked Mick dead in the eye, and said, "Calm down. I am not your drummer. You are my singer." Then came the knockout blow, delivered not out of hatred but out of hurt. Mick staggered back, stunned. Keith Richards later recounted that he caught Mick before he fell out the window. But what Mick remembered wasn't the fall. It was the reflection. The mirror showed him something he hadn't seen in years: exhaustion age fear. That punch didn't bruise his face. It shattered his illusion. "I deserved that," he admitted years later. "I had forgotten that what kept us alive wasn't fame, it was respect." The next morning, no apology was spoken. Charlie's punch had said it all. For Mick, it was the beginning of a reckoning. He seized control of every ledger, every light, determined to never again lose the rhythm that had almost slipped from his grasp. Critics called it control. Keith called it ego. Mick called it survival. But a heavier silence was coming. The deepest wound wasn't fame, it was absence. In late 1985, as the storms of scandal and ego finally began to settle, Mick Jagger faced a loss that no applause could silence. In the final days of December, Ian Stewart, the band's first heartbeat, their steady compass, was gone. He was only 47. To the world, he was just a name on a roster. But to Mick, he was the soul who had lit his fire. He never wanted the spotlight, Mick once whispered. He just wanted the music to be right. When that heartbeat stopped, something inside Mick stopped too. The fire behind his eyes dimmed to embers. Ian Stewart wasn't the face of the rebellion. He was its architect. Before the stadiums, he was the one keeping the wires from tangling. Keith once called him the glue. And when that glue was gone, things began to shift. Mick quietly admitted that every studio felt colder without him. It wasn't about the chords or the notes. It was about the balance. Ian had always been that rhythm. Without him, the laughter backstage sounded strange, hollow. For the first time, success felt heavier than the hunger ever had. The stage lights still burned, but they no longer warmed him. Doctors noted his blood pressure was high. Mick blamed the tour schedule, but those who knew him understood. It was grief wearing a mask. Ian's death wasn't just the loss of a friend, it was the quiet collapse of the foundation. After the devastating loss of Ian Stewart, the threads of Mick Jagger's private life began to unravel. The applause could no longer drown out the pain. The fire that had once consumed stadiums now began to rage inward, illuminating the fractures behind the fame. The man who could move millions with a song found he couldn't hold on to those who had once been closest. His first child, Karis, was born from an affair with singer Marsha Hunt in 1970. When Karis was born, Mick faltered. For months, he refused to acknowledge her. The courts, not the cradle, became the place her identity was recognized. "I was young, selfish, running too fast," he recalled years later. His tone wasn't defensive, but weary. Karis grew up far from her father. Then came the sensational marriage to Bianca Perez Mora Macias. Their 1971 wedding in Saint-Tropez was truly a spectacle. However, infidelity followed fame like a shadow. Within 7 years, Bianca was gone, taking their daughter Jade with her, leaving Mick with the echo of a promise he could never truly keep. He was married to the music, and there wasn't enough left for anyone else. Then came Jerry Hall, the Texas model. Nearly 2 decades together, 4 children, Elizabeth, James, Georgia May, and Gabriel. And for a time it seemed he had found peace. But peace was rarely permanent. The family home was filled with laughter, but also with the silences of long tours and tabloid storms. His son James later spoke of the invisible pressure. "I didn't want to be him, I just wanted him to see me." And then in 1999, the foundation fractured again. Jerry filed for divorce. The final blow came when the world learned Mick had fathered another child, Lucas, with Brazilian model Luciana Murad. The news exploded. Lucas grew up far away, recognizing his father's voice through songs, not hallways. "Why does everyone know my father, but I never have?" he once wondered. Mick still tried. He reached out, sent support, made calls, and tried time and time again to mend the bridges fame had burned. But love delayed often becomes love misunderstood. The man who mastered the world's rhythm never truly mastered the rhythm of love. He built empires of sound but could never soothe the ache of the silences he left behind. They said that after every storm, Mick Jagger found a way to dance again. But when Loren Scott entered his life, he stopped running and finally stood still. For 13 years, she became his quiet center. "She never wanted to tame me," Mick once said softly. "She just wanted me to breathe." And for a while, he did. The noise finally faded. But in 2014, that peace shattered violently. A call from her Manhattan apartment. Loren was gone, 49 years old. Not a single goodbye. In an instant, Mick's rhythm collapsed. Alone in an Australian hotel room, Mick hit the floor. The man who had survived everything was now broken. Diagnosed with acute stress disorder, he canceled the entire tour. "I couldn't believe it. I didn't realize how much pain she was in," he whispered. Days later, he returned to her apartment. The space was untouched, dresses still hanging, perfume still lingering. Mick sat motionless in the middle of the room for hours. "It felt like if I touched anything, I would lose her all over again." That home became a mausoleum of memory. Friends recounted that his eyes hazed over after that. The sharp blue fire had turned softer, dimmer. Years later, he confessed that a part of him had died with her. He still sang, but the voice had changed, quieter, older, touched by grief. And then, as if the universe wanted to grant one final grace, 2016 arrived. At 73, Mick's story took an unexpected turn. With ballerina Melanie Hamrick, he welcomed his 8th child, a son named Devereaux Octavian Basil Jagger. Their relationship was quiet. "The boy reminds me of the feeling of new beginnings," Mick said. "Devo is a reminder that life, even after experiencing trauma, still dares to begin again." When the noise of the world finally quieted and the ache of lost loves was just a ghost, Mick Jagger found himself facing a different kind of enemy, one he couldn't outrun. This time it wasn't betrayal, but the rebellion of his own body. At 75, the heart that had carried half a century of rhythm finally began to falter. The diagnosis was blunt: a failing heart valve and a surgery that could either save his life or silence him forever. For the first time, the stage lights were replaced by the sterile fluorescence of a hospital. The only rhythm was the steady beep of machines. He lay there alone. No longer the myth, no longer the icon, just Michael Jagger, small beneath the weight of his own history. He had spent his whole life outrunning the inevitable, but the truth whispered through a failing beat was simple. Even the strongest heart must surrender. "I thought I could outrun age," he said later. "It turns out it always knows where you are." and yet he returned. Not for the fame, but because music was the only place where life still felt infinite. The first time he stepped back on stage after the surgery, his chest ached, but his soul roared. "I'm still here," he whispered into the microphone, and the crowd answered back like thunder. Every beat from then on was borrowed time. But fate had another silence waiting. In 2021, that silence arrived. Charlie Watts, the man who had kept Mick's time for nearly 60 years, was gone. No grand performance, no warning, just gone. Mick didn't weep publicly. He didn't have to. Those who had watched him long enough recognized the hesitation before each verse, the glint in his eye when the snare drum hit just slightly off. Charlie wasn't just a drummer. He was Mick's anchor. "He was my compass," Mick later said. "When I lost him, I lost my bearings." Every concert after that felt different. Every chorus was a goodbye. Sometimes during rehearsals, he would still turn towards where Charlie's drum kit used to be, expecting that subtle nod. But now there was only emptiness. Still, he kept playing, not because it didn't hurt, but because stopping would make the silence louder. Behind the glittering costumes, an old man was carrying all the ghosts he had outlived. Brian Ian Loren. Charlie, all of them were stitched into the fabric of his voice. His songs, once anthems of rebellion, had now become reminders of memory. Now at 82, Sir Mick Jagger doesn't live as a man chasing the roar of the crowd, but as one who has achieved the rarest luxury of all, peace. From a boy in post-war England to one of the wealthiest and most enduring figures in music history, his journey is a testament to how rebellion, when fueled by discipline, can turn into an empire. Today, his net worth exceeds $550 million, but every dollar of that empire was built on rhythm and resilience. His West Sussex estate in England, a magnificent 16th-century mansion, is the heart of the masterpiece. This is where the rebel found stillness, where the man who once dominated stadiums now tends to his roses and reads to his youngest son, Devo, before bed. His empire doesn't stop there. His Caribbean hideaway is called Stargroves. In New York City, his penthouse apartment near Central Park shines like a glass crown. His properties span 4 countries. His garage is a collector's dream, classic Aston Martins, Bentleys, Ferraris. His personal archive holds dozens of guitars, each one immortalized in a song that defined generations. But perhaps the truest reflection of his wealth isn't what he owns, but what he gives away. Mick has quietly donated tens of millions to philanthropic causes, including music education, children's welfare, and global disaster relief, often anonymously. When you're lucky enough to live this long, he said, you owe the living something. And as his philanthropy spread, his private life simplified. His 8 children, from Karis to Devo, became his quiet salvation. He discusses art with Jade, his daughter, with Bianca. He shares meals with Elizabeth James, Georgia May, and Gabriel, his children, with Jerry Hall. Lucas, his son, with Luciana Murad, visits regularly, erasing distance with understanding. They are the best things I've ever been a part of creating, Mick once said, half smiling, half pained. His will is as profound as his life, ensuring that every child, every grandchild, and charitable foundations are meticulously cared for. And yet, the music hasn't stopped. The 2023 album Hackney Diamonds proved that the musical fire, however old, still burns bright. His voice may carry the tremor of the years, but his spirit remains defiant. When he steps on stage today, his movements are no longer about rebellion. They are about gratitude. Every lyric isn't just a song, it's survival. He's not chasing immortality anymore. He is living proof of it. And perhaps that is the truest lesson of all, that the greatest asset isn't the cars, the estates, or the millions. It is resilience, the ability to stand when every reason tells you to fall. Do you think that despite all the loss and tragedy, his life is still a complete success? Comment 1 if you think yes and 0 if you think no. If this story moved, you please share your favorite memory song or moment of the Rolling Stones in the comments below. And before you go, don't forget to hit like, share the video, and leave a sub to support the channel. Thank you for joining us. See you in the next story about the legends who never fade.